Hello, ladies and gentlemen. It's Ukrainian, also Russia and China show on Pod TV. My name is Sasha Star, and I would like to introduce our great contributor, Professor Jonathan Lockwood. Welcome to the show, Jonathan. How are you
Thank you.
today?
Oh, both ausgezeichnet and odlichna, as always.
Yes, we've got some horrible news from Ukraine that the
Really?
capital, Kyiv, was heavily bombed by Russians, and there are some buildings destroyed right in the center of Kiev. Pechersk is a very wealthy area where a lot of embassies actually located. So the Russians obviously are sending signal to G20 meetings in Indonesia, trying to say that, well, look, are you talking about peace? Well, okay, here's another signal for you to consider. What is the value of peace? And you have to fight to get the peace from us Russians, because we are going to keep destroying you every single day and sometimes nights as well. Jonathan, what do you think about this?
Well, again, that is a sort of a lashing out, a desperate lashing out on the part of Russia, because also you've seen in the days just prior to this that the signals were from both Kiev that they were going to continue the offensive into the winter. Indications from the president they were going to keep pressing on. What did I tell you from previous says? It would not surprise me if Kiev continued the offensive into the winter months in order to keep the Russians off balance. And in response to that, apparently Russia is resorting to terror tactics in an effort to try and break the will. Again, much the same way that Hitler tried to break the will of the British during the Battle of Britain by resorting to bombing of London, trying to terrorize the citizens and break their morale. It did not work then. It is not going to work now.
Still, it would be helpful if Ukraine would have such systems that after each hit from Russia on Kiev, for example, it could have been detected from where that missiles were fired. And so Ukrainians could reasonably quickly expose and kill this Russian target, so it would be no longer in a position to fire missiles.
Well, the West certainly has that the systems and intelligence gathering capability to detect from that and determine from where it came. We can't say, obviously, I can't say from my vantage point that they did exactly do that. It would not surprise me if the West, through its intelligence gathering capability, has been able to tell the Ukrainians from whence those strikes came, those bombing strikes or missile strikes against Kiev. So again, it does not surprise me if the response is more sophisticated air defense and ballistic missile defense systems going to Kiev to try to negate the effects of these attempted terror strikes by the Russians. And now, based upon the Ukrainians' position, they are not very far away from taking the cities that would be necessary in order to cut off the Russians' supply line to Crimea. If they do that and isolate the Crimea from both land as well as from the sea, they could certainly stop any supplies getting to Kiev via the Black Sea into Sevastopol. So I'm not. Again, this reaction by Russia is predictable, but it is unfortunate. But it is not going to tilt the war in favor of the Russians.
No,
they're simply trying to lash out in a desperate attempt to break the will of the Ukrainians and, by extension, the West. And given the current situation in the midterms, which again the current projections are that the Republican Party will take control of the House and the Democrats will retain control of the Senate. And President Biden has already indicated, he says he's not going to change any of his policies. Okay,
No.
so all right, so that sends a signal to Ukraine. It also sends a signal to Russia. You're not getting anything out. You're not getting any benefit from our elections. Sorry about that.
Well, one of the Putin's hopes was that there would be a great red wave in elections in America, and then Donald Trump will announce his presidency. So we're back to status quo. Trump
Yeah.
and Putin together rule the world. Now,
Mark Levine, a commentator, I believe, for Fox News, did a very good analysis. He had not been going along with this idea of a red wave by the Republicans, because he did a very careful study of the numbers, and that essentially the numbers that would be required, he was saying that the Republicans would have had to hold all of their seats and take a significant number of the Democrats' seats that were open and vulnerable. He said that was highly unlikely, almost mathematically impossible. So he was very skeptical of the red wave from the beginning, and he was ignored until it turns out, wait a minute, he's right. Yeah, the red wave isn't as great as anticipated, because people with better sense were looking very carefully at the numbers. Now, he also asserted, by the way, that the Democrats would be, in the Senate especially, would be much more vulnerable in 2024, not 2022, because in 2024, in the Senate, they must defend 23 Democratic Senate seats, and the Republicans only have to defend 10. And if things keep going the way they're going, yes, it is quite realistic for the Republicans to be able to take back control of the Senate in 2024. And the House races would again be a matter of just, okay, how, if the situation is still not favorable economically or politically, then you could anticipate the possibility of 2024 being a year where the Republicans take control of both the House and the Senate. And then, of course, the pundits are saying right now that for the presidential nomination for the Republicans, it would be between Trump and Governor DeSantis. Governor DeSantis' popularity seems to be going up quite strongly right now from Florida, and former President Trump seems to have taken something of a hit in his popularity or support. And but the thing is, Governor DeSantis does not have to react to anything that Donald Trump says. He doesn't have to. He doesn't have to get down and start slinging mud back and forth when DeSantis hasn't even announced. He doesn't have to announce. He doesn't have to announce until, late 2023. He's got over a full year to consider and just, stay above the fray, do his job as newly reelected governor. So I think for the Republicans, patience should be the watchword on their side. Just patience. Accept what they've got. They've got the likely control of the House of Representatives. They can do some things, but they can't do a whole lot. And they certainly are not going to do, since support of NATO is more or less a bipartisan sentiment for both the Republicans and the Democrats. Neither party is in favor of disassociating themselves from NATO. They're an integral part of that alliance, the leader of that alliance, practically. So again, I would not foresee any cessation or decrease in the Western support for Ukraine. Ukraine certainly has performed well above expectations. Why would they? And from their standpoint against Russia, never take your foot off of the neck of a dying cobra. And why do I use that metaphor? Well, Russia right now is a dying cobra. And if you give the Russians, you stop the offensive against Russia in Ukraine and give them a chance to catch their breath, to regroup, oh no. They might lash out with more. They must be made, if they are on the ropes and they are not able to pursue an effective offensive against Ukraine, There is no incentive for the Ukrainians to do anything other than continue the offensive, cut off the Crimea from Russia, from any land supply or air supply or whatever, and the Ukrainians want to set themselves up for a successful offensive in the spring, which will retake the Crimea and clear out the remaining any remaining Russian footholds on Ukrainian territory. So, from my standpoint, analytically, I look at it. The initiative is still with Ukraine, despite whatever lashings out that Russia may undertake in the interim. And it's just a matter now. This is a war of logistics and patience and persistence.
Jonathan, thank you for great analysis. I would like you to help us to understand then the recent statement from General Milley when he mentioned something in the lines that it's about time for peace talks and so on. Is there something to help Biden on the G20 meetings to show that the United States is open to some peaceful suggestions?
Well, if on President Biden's part, you see, he's been very fortunate to have an opponent that has made in Vladimir Putin who has made a series of big mistakes, galvanizing the NATO alliance, overestimating the ability of the Russian army, underestimating the reaction of NATO, just making mistake after mistake. And there is no reason for President Biden to give the Russians anything. There's nothing that the Russians have to offer other than get the. I like what Finland's ruler said when she was asked, what's the pathway out? She said, very simple. Russia gets out of Ukraine. That's the path.
It is very logical, in fact.
And she laughed as she walked off, which I thought was classic.
So, what does General Milley really meant, or was it maybe he just misspoken?
That's a possibility. I mean, he has to. He really should remember. He probably does realize that he is not the spokesperson for U.S. foreign policy or military. Now, he certainly has a voice in offering suggestions for military strategy. Now, for example, the Joint Chiefs of Staff, I'll give you a good historical example. Back during the Korean War, when General MacArthur was just agitating, he was heading towards the Yalu River, the advancing forces, and he was just eager to engage China. And even some implications of possibly calling for use of nuclear weapons against China. And the Joint Chiefs of Staff, their basic opinion was for MacArthur to engage in war involving China would be, in their words, the wrong war at the wrong time, at the wrong place, and with the wrong enemy. That's about as forthright a statement. They said it. They said it. It just made it very clear. It would be a big strategic mistake. So, if you flip it to the other side, General Milley, it's perfectly within his purview to suggest maybe now's the time for peace. Well, okay, if both sides want it.
Well, of course, it's to achieve peace with Russia, Ukrainian essentially, for starters, they have to give up the 4 of their territories. So for General Milley, it's not the same. Like if he would have to give up, say, Texas, California, New York, and Massachusetts.
Don't put that past them. Some people would be willing to give up Texas. Texas might be willing to pull out themselves. Who knows? You don't mess with Texas. But in any case, but General Milley is perfectly within his rights to say, perhaps we should now be considering peace. But then others will have the right to say, not peace at any price. We're not Neville Chamberlain. We're not going to try for sacrificing another nation in order to achieve some illusory peace. Mm-hmm. So this is something, and the Ukrainians are certainly not going to be in favor of any kind of negotiation that involves giving up any of their territory that the Russians have occupied. And I
Oh,
just want,
I think it was very, very bold and of course, very smart move on Zelensky to specify exactly the conditions for a peace talks before they would even start. So it's very difficult now to overcome. Zelensky actually he wants peace. It's not a problem. It's not that Zelensky wants to fight for the next 155 years. No, here's a peace. A, B, C, D, and maybe E. But that makes that peace from Russian point of view impossible. So, so it is impossible from Russian point of view. How that peace ever can be achieved? That's a question.
which one of the two nations is going to get off the treadmill first? The Ukrainians the Ukrainians are saying we're not getting off the treadmill. Have you got the energy to stay on the treadmill with us? Yeah. They're not showing that much in the way of effective staying power against the Ukrainian army.
Oh,
So
there is a certain element of Russia to stay on a treadmill. It requires Putin to be able to stand on a treadmill, and there are a lot of people, getting more and more people who are trying to help Putin to get out of the treadmill and install themselves into the
right,
treadmill, and hopefully they'll do better than Putin. It's still not there. I don't believe that tomorrow or the day after we will see that, but we can see that in next few months, maybe up to 6 months. But chances are growing that Putin will not be able to sustain all this when there is a major power struggle between Kadyrov and this Putin's cook, Prigozhin, and the other beautiful people there. It's really pathetic that what we're discussing now. However, the war is going slower than in the last few months, but I think once the winter will materialize fully and the roads will be frozen and so on, I think there could be chances for another Ukrainian attack against Russian
oh yeah,
positions.
without a doubt, the Ukrainians have shown they have exceeded expectations consistently since the beginning of the Russian-Ukrainian war.
Absolutely.
And they have shown great creativity and innovation in launching their counteroffensives and great success. And again, having been vindicated in my previous prediction that the Ukrainians would continue the offensive. I'm going to, shall they say, as they say, double down, and or the Ukrainians
Um,
are going to continue the offensive. They're going to continue trying to press the Russians as much as possible,
yeah,
not let them recover.
and Ukrainians are, as you said, very creative in using this new weapons and technology like HIMARS, for example. So now Western armies are studying the cases how Ukrainians are using this new weapons.
And exactly, and they're giving, uh, although it might be a faulty historical analogy, the Nazis in the Spanish Civil War in 1937. The Nazi Germany was testing out a lot of their tactical doctrine in support of Franco's regime in 1937. And for those who were observant enough, they were getting a sort of an interesting preview of how Nazi Germany would execute its Blitzkrieg doctrine during World War II. In this case, the Ukrainians are giving a very good laboratory, a very good textbook, a very good example of how to most effectively employ new weapon systems. And oh yes, of course, the United States and the Western allies will not only take due note of this in their own studies and analyses of the use of these weapons, but I anticipate there will be, shall we say, for the military-industrial complex, quite a market for the HIMARS systems, not just for Ukraine, but for the other members of the NATO alliance.
Oh, there's a great lineup, I think, for next 10 years. There are orders from all over the world for HIMARS systems.
Well, it's like I think I may have told you this one. when I was stationed over in Germany, one of the intelligence colonels, I was a captain at the time on the staff, and for my birthday, the colonel gave me a birthday card. On the front of the card, it had a picture of a beautiful white dove, and with a single word, peace. On the inside of the card, it said, "It's bad for promotions." Peace. It's bad for promotions.
Jonathan, do you remember in the movie Doctor Strangelove when they're
Oh,
attacking
yes.
this
How I
the
learned to
base?
stop worrying and love the bomb. Yep.
That's right. And the big sign when there is a fighting to get control of this airbase. So the big sign there was "Peace is our profession," and there is a heavy fighting and fire all over the place. And so, peace is our profession.
Right. A
I
very,
love it.
very ironic joke.
Yeah, of course. Yes, of course. So they're peace professionals on both sides, and they're fighting actually for peace. That's what's in their mind. So
We are in violent agreement.
yeah. So there are no contradictions that peace
No.
is our profession. Of course it is. So now you also did very good analysis of political scene in US after this election, and made some not prediction, but some analysis of what's forthcoming in 2024. So maybe you have also analysis of what Trump is going to say tonight.
Well, trying to predict what he is going to say is not a winning proposition. I mean, you shouldn't be putting any significant amount of money trying to predict what he's going to say this evening. It would surprise me more if he said that he was going to sort of hold off, or if he or rule out a 2024 run. I think he has too much invested emotionally, as well as from what he believes he owes to his supporters. So he may just want to keep the pot stirring and keep the other side anxious or worrying about whether or not he may actually run. Now, obviously, if he chooses not to run in 2024, again, which I have a hard time envisioning, then that would leave a clear road. According to current polls, it would leave a clear road for Governor DeSantis to make a run and be the nominee. The best case for Governor DeSantis at that point is if he is successfully able to reach out to Donald Trump, make peace, mend fences, do some behind the scenes deals and stuff, and get the support of not only him but his supporters. That he is enough of a supporter of Donald Trump's agenda, or convince him that it's a reasonable thing to do, that he could come out with the best of both worlds, get the Republican nomination and get the support of Donald Trump and his considerable base of supporters, which would be a win-win for the Republican Party as well as for Governor DeSantis. But I don't think you're going to see, no matter what Donald Trump says this evening, you are not going to see a vigorous reaction or response from Governor DeSantis, because he has so far just played it completely aloof, and he has been completely quiet. And he, according to his some people close to him, he does not want to get down in the mud and start slinging mud a full 2 years before a presidential election. He says there is no upside to that. None.
Right. Yeah, there were some analysts who predicted that if Trump will indeed announce his run for president, DeSantis' best strategy is to not participate this year in the presidential election 2024, keep it until 2028, and let things settle. Yeah.
Because once, assuming that Donald Trump gets his second presidential term, And in 2028, that would position Governor DeSantis extremely well for 2028.
Yeah,
And,
yeah,
uh,
yeah.
and well, just as if you'll recall, back in 1976, when Gerald Ford, having taken the remainder of President Nixon's term after he had resigned because of Watergate, there was a very strong competition in 1976 for the Republican nomination between Gerald Ford and Ronald Reagan. It was a very tough fight all the way down. And at one point, there had been discussions of Ronald Reagan being Gerald Ford's vice presidential running mate. Well, while that might be tempting, it would have been tempting. I think you had two very strong egos at play there.
Yes.
And so, as it was, it worked out for the best as far as Ronald Reagan was concerned. He was able to take advantage of President Jimmy Carter's shortcomings in Jimmy Carter's term, and was able to successfully exploit that. You may have a similar case. You may have a similar dynamic at work here. It might well be in Governor DeSantis' best interests to simply stay above the fray, continue doing a wonderful job as a reelected governor of Florida, set himself up as a very, very good successor to Trump's second term, assuming he gets it and wins it. So there is a lot to be said for just everybody exercising patience, no matter what Donald Trump says this evening.
Well, from the perspective of Ukraine, I think, of course, Donald Trump possible run for presidency is the worst case scenario for Ukraine because of his friendship with Putin, and because he was essentially
that assumes Putin's even around then.
Exactly, that's what I wanted to mention later. And remember, of course, that Donald Trump was cultivated by KGB since the late 70s. And all the time he was cultivated as an asset. And his all actions while being president definitely confirmed that. And Russian help him even to be elected in 2016 speaks volume for itself. So obviously, Trump, even if Putin is not there, but in 2024, but if Trump has any chance and he will get elected, which I doubt a lot, but everything is possible.
Well, again, and then that assumes that the Russian-Ukrainian war would actually go for another 2 years.
That's true too.
Yes, yeah. That is highly unlikely from my perspective.
It is
that it would be over, done, settled, and in that sense, that you and keep in mind also that the intent of Ukraine, because of the fact that they are practicing with standardizing their weapons based on NATO standards, the likelihood is very high that if the war is concluded within the next 2 years, that Ukraine would immediately apply for membership in NATO, so that in case of any future aggressive actions, Article 5 is automatically invoked in event
unless Trump will be elected and will dissolve NATO at all. That's what he wanted to do anyway. But I don't think.
I don't think he would be willing to go against his NATO allies, given the fact that that Ukraine would now be a member of NATO. I think there are going to be a number of other very complicating factors at play that will moderate his actions.
And also, if Trump will seriously elect to run, he needs to invent something besides "Make America Great Again" and election was stolen. He needs some fresh ideas as well, because he cannot run for years on the same slogans.
You never know. But
everything is possible.
Yeah, there are lots of that. It depends on the types of people that he would reach out to and tap for those new ideas. We just don't know. But he has an opportunity to learn from the lessons of his first administration, from his first term, and do things differently in order to make sure that his policies are more effective, and rather than being undermined. So that is a very open question. It's one that I hesitate to I hesitate to commit to something like that because it's I mean it's it's like trying to commit to in a way I feel sorry for a lot of these people who are committing to climate change. You know, they're saying, "Oh, we've got to do something, or in 10 years the world is going to end." Well, there is an event in nature that could reverse sharply this entire global warming trend, which people have ignored. Matter of fact, a young child when I was at church yesterday asked me, "What would it be? What would it be like if we had a cold summer?" And I responded instantly. I said, "Well, in that case, young man, we would have something very similar to the year 1816, the year without a summer." Because what had happened then was that you had had a major volcanic eruption the year before. And the results of that volcanic eruption spread ash into the stratosphere, and it created a global cooling event, which resulted in a very cool summer, but catastrophically cold other seasons, which resulted in crop failures and famines. And and the thing like to point out to some of the people who are worrying about climate change, is if you're worrying about global warming, don't worry too much, because all it would take is a major volcanic eruption or a series of major volcanic eruptions by either the lesser volcanoes that are currently active, or worst case, the eruption of just one of the 7 existing supervolcanoes on the planet Earth.
True.
If
And
one,
also, Jonathan, global warming could be very beneficial for countries like Canada, for example, if we would have a slightly warmer winter. I wouldn't mind that at all.
Well, there is anecdotal evidence that during the medieval warm period, a number of centuries ago, there was the presence in England of vineyards. The English were growing wine. Were actually able to develop wine during that period, which indicates, which by the way is de facto evidence that it was much warmer then than it is today. And people don't, the climate change activists do not like to discuss that period.
And people didn't complain about that in England.
No, they didn't complain. No, they didn't complain about it. They didn't complain about it being too warm. So in any case, I tend to take an agnostic approach to climate change in any case, because there are other ways of navigating energy sources. Ben Banerjee and I have discussed going to a nuclear solar combination, relying principally on nuclear and then using solar as the backup, and both of which are carbon free.
Hopefully Ben will be with us next week. In the meantime,
that would be great.
I would like to thank you very much for today's program. It was really great. And I would like to say goodbye to all our listeners. And I will see you on our next program on Friday. Thank you so much. Bye-bye, everybody.